Hello, my dear folks. Welcome to the show. My name is Jack Zhao. The show is East to West with G&E TV. As you quite noticed, that for the past several weeks, we have done a number of shows regarding the Ferguson case in Missouri, whereby Mr. Mike Brown, a young guy, was killed by a police officer, Darren Wilson. Right, good. Well, there are takes on the left-hand side, there are takes on the right-hand side, and there are takes of no side. Okay, anyway, voices of all kinds are heard at this very moment. And of course, at this very moment, of course, by the way, exactly as we speak, there are protests going on all across the country. If not all across the country, at least 39 cities were kind of in a tension, a special tension about it. Police forces are being applied, a special force is being applied, especially in town of Ferguson. So to get to the point, to the mystifying situation, to the mystifying event, I have invited my good friend, my brother, Mr. Joe Gardner, former candidate of California, 48th Assembly House position. He wasn't that lucky, but yet his ideology, his concept is the kind that I adore so much that I wish that I could vote twice. Okay, anyway, there's always another chance, right?
Yes.
I believe that you will never stop running, and you told me about it. So let's not talk about election, let's talk about his concept or his take over the Ferguson case of Missouri. So, sir, I would address you, sir, because you were once on the force. So, welcome, sir, to the show.
Thank you, Jack. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Sure. Mr. Joe Gardner was a service member on the Santa Monica PD for over 40 years. And his sergeant, his high-ranking, one of the high-ranking officers, who has dedicated to his big part of his life to the service to people. Santa Monica, we know that. Santa Monica is known for its best PD, right?
Yeah.
People all say that. Okay, so first of all, I would like to check with you your overall take of the incident and the consequences followed, please.
Well, I think it obviously the death of any young person is a tragedy. In this case, it's a significant tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people feel sad that this incident occurred. Although I think some of the evidence that's come forth from the grand jury and from other credible sources have said that Mr. Brown may have caused or accelerated this incident to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have an issue where a police officer had to fight for his life to protect himself,
okay.
and he felt his obligation to protect his community, and unfortunately it didn't work out in a way that probably he would have liked, or any community leaders would have liked to see.
Okay. Earlier you told me that you heard about the grand jury verdict or discussion, and you heard about Mr. Wilson's own testimony about it. So can you shed light with my audience what is being said, please?
Yeah, I think the grand jury had a very difficult issue to deal with. They spent over 25 days looking at and hearing testimony from a variety of sources. They watched, I believe it was over 70 hours, looked at video and photographs in regards to that incident, and testimony from other sources. I think they did what they were empowered and obligated to do. They rendered a decision that said no indictment. It's a difficult thing to have to come to. I know they probably had some real concerns about giving that that opinion, but I think they're based on the information that I saw from the grand jury some of the information that's come out from the grand jury, I think it was kind of appropriate for them to come to that conclusion.
Okay. What did you learn from Officer Wilson's own statement?
Well, I listened to Officer Wilson's statement there was an interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and it was quite revealing. And as a police officer, you have to have an appreciation for his statements and what he said. And you know, in essence, he wanted to make this issue a simple one by getting Mr. Brown to move to the sidewalk or to the curb. Mr. Brown was walking in the middle of the street.
I see.
When you know, Officer Wilson approached him and asked him to leave the street, you know, Mr. Brown decided to become very aggressive, to the extent that you know, he didn't want to listen to what the officer said. And
with the infos that you are provided, both from grand jury discussion and the own testimony of the police officer involved, do you think, could you please portray the exact scene, like what in your eye you will assume what happened exactly from point 1 to point 2, or point 3 or point 4?
Well,
could you just try to
of course,
visualize it?
Yeah, I did, and actually that was a lot of what, when I listened to his statement during his television interview, I did run those pictures through my mind. And as a police officer, you know, you get confronted with similar situations. You know, he just was content to want to continue his patrol assignment, not to have this kind of encounter. He was merely trying to get Mr. Brown and his companion to move to the sidewalk, and I think unexpectedly he was caught unexpectedly.
Was he at that moment inside the car or outside the car?
He was inside the car.
He was inside the car, and he started communication when he was inside the car?
Yes, initially. He'd asked him
with
to...
With an open window or something?
Yeah, he pulled up alongside them. Now you have to imagine that they're walking in the middle of the street where the yellow line is. He describes that, and he pulls up alongside them and tells them, you know, Mr. Brown to move to the sidewalk.
And Officer Wilson was on the driver's seat, so left-hand side, through the open window, ordering him to go to walk on the sidewalk.
Right.
Am I right? And what happened in your picture? I mean, you visualize.
Yeah, he didn't get the response he expected. Mr. Brown became aggressive, verbally assaultive, you know, and the next thing he knew is when he had ordered him once again to move to the sidewalk, Mr. Brown decided to have a door-to-door confrontation with...
door-to-door confrontation?
Yeah, you know, he walked to the officer's door and began to have this verbal altercation with the officer, and before the officer really had a chance to react, it would appear to me, Mr. Brown began physically assaulting him through the window of the police car.
You see. When we say physically assaulting him, do you get a chance to visualize the exact picture according to the jury verdict and also the statement?
Yes. They showed some pictures that were taken, evidentiary pictures after the incident took place. And the officer had, you know, bruising or redness to his face. You know,
the left-hand side or right-hand
side?
The
left-hand side of his face, which would have been the driver's side window area. He had, in his testimony, had recalled that he had a struggle with Mr. Brown over his handgun. He was being assaulted, you know, was trying to take his handgun out, and Mr. Brown had grabbed the top of the handgun, his semi-automatic handgun, and basically locked it so that he could not pull the trigger. So he attempted to pull the trigger once, twice, nothing happened, and that's because, you know, Mr. Brown had a firm grip on his weapon. After he attempted to pull the trigger the third time, that's when the weapon discharged. And that's when Mr. Brown, he wasn't sure if he had hit him. He was still struggling with Mr. Brown, but then Mr. Brown fled away from the police car, up ahead, down the street. And And that was the opportunity when the officer, who was already trying to get out of the police car, pushed the door open, and Mr. Brown pushed the door back against him, and then he fled, as my recollection of the testimony. And when he got about 30 or 40 feet away, the officer, who was now standing outside of his police car, was calling for assistance for other officers to respond because he had discharged his weapon. You know, he was indicating that the shots were fired. And when
shots were fired when he was running away from him?
No, during the time he was struggling with Mr. Brown at the window of the police car,
I
the
mean,
driver's door.
Those are fatal for 6 bullets?
No, that didn't take place until he was able to get out of the car and radio for more assistance.
Yeah, that moment, Mr. Brown was about 30, 40 feet away from him. So, and then he fired a shot at him?
No, what happened then is that Mr. Brown, he had ordered Mr. Brown to stop. He was going to pursue Mr. Brown, but Mr. Brown decided to come back, or turn around, and challenge the officer. And Officer Wilson recognized that Mr. Brown in his statements was running back towards him in charging motion.
I see.
At high speed, and it became concerned that he was going to attack him again. So it was at that time when from 30 feet down to 15 feet, where the gap had narrowed between him and Mr. Brown, is when he apparently discharged his weapon.
Discharged his weapon for the sixth bullet.
time. Yeah.
That's the 6 bullets, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. To my audience today, I really try to get to the bottom of the issue. That's the Ferguson, Missouri case where Mr. Brown, Michael Brown, was shot to death by a police officer. And to consult to the bottom line, I have invited Mr. Joe Gardner, a former Santa Monica PD high-ranking officer, to discuss this from a police officer or former police officer point of view to see the truth. So, so we did quite well. We did quite some understanding in the first segment, and we will continue, of course, after this very short break. Stay with us.